Once again, picking off where we left off, we're now going to get into the next arc of the series, which is obviously, the UA Sports Festival. Oh, and by the way, I do have a question for you guys before I actually begin with everything. Do you guys enjoy when there's no intros to these videos, like the parts at least, and then I just get into it, like without wasting your guys' time? If so, then let me know down below in the comments so I can hopefully keep doing this, but if not, then, I'll add a little 10-second intro, I guess. Why not? But yeah, whatever. Anyways, jumping into the story, we now fast forward to the students back in the classroom. And after all the events that took place in the USJ, one thing is actually a lot different than in the original story. Number one, some rumors did begin to spread about one boy being responsible for the actual help in defeating the villains at the USJ. Because it's kind of common knowledge that the USJ was infiltrated by villains, but one thing that isn't as common knowledge is the fact that one student very much so helped in taking them all down. And this is a widespread rumor that a lot of people have been wondering about. And some people in, UA don't really know how to keep their mouths shut. I'm looking at you, Mineta. So this rumor ends up spreading massively throughout UA. So just like in the original, where the rest of the classes, like the general studies and people like Shinso and Class 1B, when they all went to look at the competition and scope them out in their own classroom, after class was over and stuff like that, we would get a situation in which all of them are pretty much not letting them all get out of their, get out of the room. And Izuku would make his way to the door wondering what the heck all this commotion's about. Once he would get up there to the front, he would see all of these people there, and then all of them would be like, that's him, he's the boy with the green hair. As Izuku's looking at them, he'd say, hey, what are you guys doing here? Like being super nice, super kind. And then finally, after he'd be nice, and they're like, oh, he's a nice guy. What are we worried about, Suddenly, Bakugo comes to the door and he's like, huh, what are all these extras doing here? As he sees how Izuku's handling the situation, smacking him in the head, going, Deku, how many times do I have to tell you to stop acting like a loser? As from here, Izuku would be like, come on, Bakugo, I'm just being nice. And Bakugo says, just follow me. As he would stay quiet, walking past them, brushing by them, and Izuku would do the same. As suddenly, his whole vibe would change, and you would just feel an energy of, power coming off of him. He would walk by them and then they'd all be like, was he acting just now? Is this the real him or is this the fake him? They're all having these conversations, and suddenly Shinso from the crowd would say, it must be nice to have such a powerful quirk, but let's see that quirk save you from me when we get to the UA Sports Festival. As hearing that, Deku just continues walking away, thinking about what he said, being like, what kind of quirk could he possibly have that would actually pose a threat to me? I mean, genuinely, Izuku up to this point has never had a single situation in which he felt like he could possibly lose. So he's not worried at all, but he is thinking about why he said that though. Regardless of this though, we would eventually fast forward to all of the students being present at the UA Sports Festival, and this is where things slightly change, because we all know that Deku was the one that got the highest points in the the UA entrance exam, so he's actually going to be the one to give the speech, meaning unfortunately we don't get the I'm gonna win speech from Bakugo, and instead we get a very, very cool, lighthearted, and very badass speech from Deku, which Bakugo helped him actually write. And Izuku at first would have been reading it from a paper, being kind of nervous, until he finally heard the words of Bakugo through his head, being like, stop being such a loser, which ultimately gave Izuku the confidence to carry himself in the way that Bakugo probably would have liked. So because of this, Izuku was finally able to give a solid speech, and the crowd went nuts. Following this, obviously, we have the race event, and normally I'd be like, all right, so here's how this goes down and this, but bro, let's be honest, this dude has the speed of a Dragon Ball Z character. These dudes were literally able to fly across the planet in 20 seconds from the Buu saga, so there's no doubt in my mind that Izuku's gonna speed blitz so unbelievably fast that there's literally an after image that's just standing still at the starting line. The second that the starter's pistol's blown, Izuku would just look like he's just standing still. But if you looked at the cameras, which didn't actually register him passing, you would notice that Izuku literally got there within a blink of an eye and his after image was still there. So everybody would be stunned as Midnight would say, well, would you look at that? Looks like we have our winner. Seems to me like somebody here has a teleportation quirk. As she would look towards Izuku and wink, Izuku getting bright red in the face as everybody else eventually ends up passing. And finally, we would move on to the Calvary battle section. Now, once we get to this part of the test, this is where things get a bit interesting because in most of my what ifs, I never pair Bakugo and Deku together, but in this specific time, Bakugo definitely would be paired up with Izuku because he got second place, which would honestly scare most of everybody else because not only did this kid straight up blitz to the finish line before they could even perceive it, but then the second place dude got there in like 2 seconds. So that was just insane, and he did that using One For All in tandem with his explosion quirk, right? And this would pretty much lead to Bakugo looking towards Deku and being like, hey, I'm gonna be working with you in this event. Don't get too cocky though. I'm only doing this to make sure you don't make me look bad. Cause if worse comes to worse and they make us fight each other, then I'm probably gonna lose and I gotta make sure that my image is upheld. So don't carry yourself as a loser. Got that, Deku? As Izuku hearing this would be like, fine. And Bakugo would say, you better, because I won't have it if my debut gets ruined by some loser. As Izuku would be like, shut up, Bakugo. And then Bakugo would be like, that's exactly the kind of bravado we need from you right now. You better go out there and make us proud. As, you know, what would pretty much take place is Bakugo and Izuku would have 2 random students from UA join them. I mean, Mei Hatsume is most likely going to be joining them, as well as Uraraka, just because, you know, she's grateful to him and she kind of sees the fact that if she joins that team, she'll probably end up doing very well. So that would be the team that ends up being assembled. And because Bakugo and Deku are both on the same team, no one's going to get close to them. Plus, even if they try, dude, it's just not going to end well for them. Bakugo has the ability to pretty much fly, so he can just jump off of the carriage, which is, you know, all 3 of their bodies who are carrying him, and he can just like blitz towards you, blast an explosion in your face, and rip your headband off all at the same time. Like, it's just not a good idea. So it honestly would get kind of boring until eventually Bakugo would say, dang it, no one's coming towards us. As he would say, guess we gotta go to them. And he would make his way towards a couple of other teams, just absolutely destroying their hopes and dreams to advance for the next event of the festival, until finally the event would finally be over and we would then move on to the 1v1 battles. Now, just like in the original, Izuku would still be matched up against Shinso, and this is going to be extremely bad for him. Because although Izuku is extremely superior to all of his other opponents in terms of physical strength and speed and just everything, dude, he hasn't exactly trained his mind. Plus, I don't really know how to counter Shinso's like talking thing. And with the way that Izuku kind of carries himself whenever he's not thinking of what Bakugo has to say, he's gonna say something to Shinso, especially if Shinso starts talking trash to him and Izuku has Bakugo's influence in his mind. Yeah, he's gonna say something. Plus, if he doesn't, Izuku is just the kind of person to be like, what would make you say that? You know what I mean? Like, that's just how Izuku is in this event. So Izuku would pretty much stand face to face against Shinso, and the first thing that comes out of Shinso's mouth would basically be telling him that it must be nice to have been born with such an amazing quirk. It must have been good to be da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and just start spouting a bunch of insults at Deku. This would cause Deku to pretty much like say something to Shinso. It doesn't really matter what he says, honestly, because he says something, right? Like he gets trapped in Shinso's quirk. And because in this event, Izuku doesn't exactly have One For All, Izuku has absolutely no way of snapping out of it. Or does he? Because as Izuku is making his way towards the edge of the arena and he's walking off and everybody's like, hey kid, what are you doing? Why are you walking off? Izuku, right as he's about to step off, he would hear a voice telling him to get his head in the game. As Izuku, hearing that, would be too late. His body wouldn't be able to do anything, but he knows that he heard some voice. It's not his own. It was something else, and he's not really sure what that was, but he lost, and now he knows he's going to get an earful from Bakugo. And so that's exactly what would happen. Following these events, Izuku would pretty much get filleted by Bakugo, who would tell him that he's a loser. How could he like let his guard down? And then Izuku would go on to explain that kid's quirk pretty much made him not be able to do anything because if he talked to him, he lost. And unfortunately for Shinso, this is where everything would stop because we know how Icy Hawk gets down. Todoroki's not going to be saying anything to him. He's just going to straight up freeze him if he makes him mad. Like, why does he have to say anything if he can just one-shot KO him, you know? So that's exactly what Todoroki does. And we would eventually get a 1v1 battle between Katsuki and Todoroki, which would not end up very well at all for either of them. Well, very well for Bakugo, because in this timeline, when Todoroki shoots a gigantic geyser of ice, Bakugo using one hand would blow it up, as with the other he would turn it behind him and shoot himself straight in front of Todoroki. As in one fell swoop, Bakugo grabs onto the throat of Todoroki and blasts him into the outskirts of the wall, smashing him into it, as he would backflip with his explosions mid-air and then aim one giant explosion, shooting it squarely at the body of Todoroki, which causes Todoroki to straight up fall onto the grass, completely unconscious. That final battle literally lasted like 1 second. And it's kind of ironic because all of the other battles that Todoroki had at that point were pretty much washes. It's kind of funny to see that somebody who was thinking he was all that then ended up getting kind of watched by somebody else. You know, it's kind of that Dragon Ball mentality of like, there's always a bigger fish out there. And, you know, he unfortunately had to learn that the hard way. So moving on, we would eventually have some time with Izuku by himself, where he would start thinking to himself that, yeah, he's stronger than everybody else and he has all of these incredible gifts, but he would think to himself one thing: what would ever happen if there was a villain that could control his mind? A villain that could take over his body? Something along those lines. He would remember the prospect of a villain taking over his body because of the sludge villain and what had happened on that day, with him telling him that he needs his body and that he's going to be a real hero to him. And then he would also remember what just happened to him with Shinso, realizing that if that was to ever happen, nobody in this world would possibly be able to stop him. So Izuku, realizing this, would start to think that he needs to be in control of his mind. That's the one thing that he needs. And as he would think that, he would hear a voice like slightly like quiet in the back of his mind telling him he does need to focus on that. But Izuku kind of just ignores it, not exactly knowing what that is. But as you guys can most likely tell at this point already, it's pretty much Beerus, because Izuku is the reincarnation of Beerus, right? So what would pretty much end up taking place after this is that we would finally find ourselves back in the classroom after the UA festival would be done. Izuku would be in class along with his, everybody else, and they would finally go on and pick hero names. It'd be in this moment that Izuku would hear the name Beerus in his mind, and so thinking about that, he thinks that's a pretty cool hero name. So he chooses the name Beerus the Destroyer as his hero name. And so once that would all be said and done, Izuku would make his way towards Nezu's office, where Nezu would be like, "Ah, Izuku, I'm so glad to see you here. Who did you end up choosing for your internship?" And Izuku, turning towards Nezu, would say, "I wanted to talk to you about that. I don't think I want to choose anybody for my internship. Would it be okay if I just stayed here and worked on meditation and controlling my mind? I want to make sure that no villain will ever be able to infiltrate my mind and take over me. Because if that happens, then, how's anyone going to stop me?" Nezu, hearing that, would think to himself that is extremely smart. Plus, he can let it slide considering the fact that Izuku practically trains with pro heroes every day. So he doesn't really need some hero internship. He practically has been getting that from the moment he took the entrance exam. And so instead of doing the usual thing and going along with Gran Torino, because in this timeline Bakugo's the one that does that, meaning Bakugo's going to be the one who is responsible for saving Ida, not really wanting to, but just kind of doing it because he could, you know what I mean? Bakugo also would definitely enjoy taking the credit for defeating Stain, so I can see him pretty much like taking the credit 100%. Like, he's not letting Endeavor take the credit for that. Bakugo is trying to make his debut, So with that, Bakugo would now go down in the books as the kid who not only won the UA Sports Festival, but also took down the hero killer Stain. And all over the news, it would begin saying that these new hero prospects are absolutely insane. Like, people start talking about Izuku and Bakugo and even Todoroki, even though he lost, right? Everyone's just going crazy. They're like, dude, these new heroes are just built different, right? And as that would be happening, like I said, Deku would be meditating. The entire first 2 days, Deku just meditating, until finally one day, as Deku has his eyes closed and he's thinking about all the events that have transpired up to this point, he would finally see himself in a white area. Everything is just white. He like literally can see nothing, until suddenly he can hear the footsteps of somebody and like a groggling voice that just woke up, as it would say, who are you, kid? And Izuku would be like, who are you? As Beerus would say, well, I'm Beerus the Destroyer, and you're Izuku Midoriya. Can't believe that I reincarnated as you. As Izuku hearing that would be like, you're Beerus the Destroyer? What's that? From here, Beerus would go on to explain that he's a god, as Izuku would be like, a god? What are you talking about? And Beerus would go on to explain that a long time ago, in this very universe, he was the god of destruction for Universe 7. Izuku hearing that would be like, Universe 7? What are you talking about? There's multiple universes? As Beerus would go on to explain that there is multiple universes, and he'll get to that if he would just shut up. As from here, Izuku would be like, all right, I'm sorry. And from here, Beerus would just walk around Izuku, like hitting him in his arm, checking his muscular structure, seeing his height and seeing how Izuku's built, and he'd be like, wow, I mean, I guess you have potential, but you're pretty weak. As Izuku would be like, weak? Me? And Beerus in an instant would stand before Izuku, grabbing him by the neck. Izuku couldn't even register what was going on. And Beerus would pretty much hold him up, saying, like I said, weak, as his energy starts sparking up. But ultimately, Beerus would go on to say that it's okay, because before creation must come destruction. Which would lead Beerus to pretty much begin to explain to Izuku that while he's probably far more powerful than anybody on this world and any world, considering Frieza, Goku, Vegeta, and all of them died a long time ago when Earth was destroyed by a malevolent being in the universe that was allowed to escape, with Beerus kind of alluding to something but not exactly saying what it is, right? And so we would finally get to a point where Izuku wonders what in the heck he's talking about, with Beerus pretty much explaining that this Earth is not even the original Earth, that this Earth was made by a wish by Krillin a long time ago so that most of human civilization could come here and forget all the Zero Warriors, forget the Dragon Balls. But Izuku needs to train if he's gonna have any hope of defeating this thing, because he promises it will come. And he even defeated himself. So not only is Izuku now gonna have to get stronger than Beerus, which is gonna make literal life unfun for him, because like no villain is gonna be able to even pose him like even the slightest threat. But now Izuku's gonna have to train like his life depends on it, literally. So for the next couple of like minutes, Beerus would pretty much just brief him out on why he's even reincarnated in the first place, stating that Goku wished that Beerus was reincarnated when they were fighting their final battle. It was him, Goku, and Vegeta against this thing, but all three of them together couldn't even defeat it. Beerus would go on to explain that the only reason they lost is because he couldn't control Ultra Instinct. He was lazy, he didn't train, he thought that he was stronger than everybody else, but he's not going to make that same mistake, not with him. As Izuku hearing this would be like, so how are you gonna train me? Aren't you just a figure of my imagination? And Beerus would go on to say, there's nothing imaginary about this boy. You're gonna do mental training, which is gonna translate to the outside world. And after this, you're gonna go out to an open wasteland. You're gonna begin training all of these abilities. So get ready, because you're in for hell on earth. As for the following next week, Beerus would beat some knowledge into this man, teaching him and refining his fighting style, showing him the destruction style, fighting style, and Izuku would eventually end up leveling up by so many tiers. Like, now it would get to the point where Izuku, after training for just a week, would get to that level of Beerus in the God of Destruction movie. You know, like that level where like he's like really OP. Or no, not even then, but like Tournament of Destroyer Beerus, like he has like that level of finesse, right? So now he's very powerful, right? And Izuku is now feeling himself. He thinks that he could fight whoever, that no one's gonna stand up to him. But what's kind of embarrassing is that Beerus and his mindscape just completely destroys him every single time. Like, not only is Izuku training in the outside world and in his mind at night while he's literally sleeping, but Izuku is getting his butt beat by Beerus every single time. And one thing that Beerus would tell him is that at this current moment, Whis, his angel attendant, is in a stasis-like state, not being able to do anything because the next god of destruction was never appointed. So their universe is kind of in a state where if they don't have another one appointed, they're kind of cooked. So Izuku, after hearing that, would think to himself that he has to become this destroyer creature, and Beerus would go on to explain that that's exactly what he needs to do. So Izuku, after hearing that, would think to himself that he needs to get stronger to defeat this thing, and then after that he has to become some destroyer. He would go on to explain that he just wanted to become a hero. He doesn't want that kind of responsibility. But Beerus would go on to pretty much explain to him that he didn't want to be a destroyer either. But look at how that cookie crumbled. As from here, Beerus would pretty much go on to state that he's going to go back to sleep. As Izuku would say, "Are you kidding me? You literally said that you died because you slept so much, and now you're going to do that again?" Beerus would look at him like angrily and say, "Shut up, kid." As Izuku would just be like, "Well, regardless, thank you for the help," as Beerus would tell Izuku to continue his training, and next time to go to another planet so that he's able to practice his destruction abilities, telling Izuku that there's multiple planets in the universe that haven't been destroyed by this specific creature just because there's no life on there, so there's nothing for him to gain. So Izuku could practice using different, more destructive techniques on those planets. So Izuku would take that to heart. And after the internship period would finally be over, Izuku would go back to class where there would just be a different aura around him. Izuku would learn to become more hardened, become more serious, and understand that he's not training right now to just be a hero. He's training for something greater than that, the salvation of the universe itself. And so, as everybody would walk into class, Bakugo could just sense that Izuku got so much stronger. There's just a presence in that room of overwhelming, it's to the point where Mineta literally had to go outside just to catch his breath because the air was so thick in that area that he just straight up couldn't breathe. And so Aizawa would finally make his way into the class and just to kind of tell Izuku to lower the aura. As from here, Izuku would do so, apologizing for that, and he would take his power all the way down. Bakugo, after seeing that, would go over to Izuku and ask him what the heck happened to him. As Izuku would just go on to explain that a lot of things happened during these last 2 weeks, saying that he met his predecessor. As Bakugo would be like, "Predecessor? What are you talking about?" And that, ladies and gentlemen, is where I'm going to be ending part 3 for What If Deku was Beerus's reincarnation. Thank you guys so much for sticking around to the end of this video. Make sure to go check out some of my other Dragon Ball What Ifs, which I kind of alluded to in the first part of this video. But with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, let me know what other What Ifs you guys are going to be wanting soon. And just to let you guys know, I genuinely might start double uploading for the month of November and December. I'm not too sure, but I might start dropping some What If parts, bangers, and then movies. Maybe if I do that, I won't be able to drop full on What If movies randomly, but they'll kind of be compilations, I guess you could say. But yeah, with that all out of the way, ladies and gentlemen, have yourselves an awesome day. God bless.